Next time you drive over Highway 17, keep an eye out for some fences along the highway right around Laurel Curve. That's your signal that you have just driven over a wildlife crossing. This wildlife crossing opened a couple of years ago and is helping wildlife in the Santa Cruz Mountains avoid traffic and avoid collisions. This is just one of many solutions that have been and are being implemented to help protect mountain lions. Where do they go? How do they hunt? When do they hunt? Where do they raise their young? These are some of the questions that I get into with Chris Wilmers, professor of wildlife ecology at UC Santa Cruz, on today's episode of Science Solutions Santa Cruz. I'm Jonathan Hicken. Enjoy. In the studio today, I've got Chris Wilmers, professor of wildlife ecology at UC Santa Cruz. What's going on, Chris?
Oh, not much. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So you are known around town as the Puma guy.
I guess so.
You study mountain lions.
I do.
Do you remember the first time you ever saw one?
I do. I was in Yellowstone. I did my PhD research in Yellowstone, and I was going around with a buddy of mine who was working on cougars. They call them cougars in Montana.
Oh, are there like regional differences in how we talk about them?
Yeah, they call them cougars in Montana. They call them mountain lions here. I like to call them pumas.
Why?
Oh, because it's a common name, but it's also the genus name. And I love the way the Brits say it. They call them pumas. Yeah. So I went out for a day in the field with my buddy Dan Staler, who was studying mountain lions at the time. And we were hiking along some sort of steep drainages, and we were just using VHF telemetry, which sort of you can point in the direction of the animal, and it gives you a signal that they're somewhere there.
That's like a radio, right?
It's a radio antenna.
Signal.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can picture someone like holding this device and kind of scanning the horizon for the beep.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, he got out he started looking around because it was pointing right downhill, and he was like, oh, there's the mountain lion or cougar. And I looked down there, and I was like, where? It was like, it's right there, like 50 meters in front of us. I was like, where? And eventually I could see it, but it was just standing so still. It was looking right at us that it just sort of blended into the background through its just lack of motion.
You were studying wolves at the time, is that right?
Yeah, I was looking at how the reintroduction of wolves was affecting the whole scavenger community. Grizzly bears, black bears, ravens, eagles, coyotes.
All right, well, I know we're not here to talk about wolves, but I am curious, like what was the big takeaway from that study, from your dissertation?
Yeah, sort of one of the unanticipated effects of wolf reintroduction was that they would change the way scavengers get fed. And that is that before wolves, you had this large elk population that was largely dying at the end of severe winters. And so you'd get like a huge amount of die-off at the end of some winters, but not all. And it would be like March, April, the landscape would be littered with dead elk. But with wolves, they stopped dying because of severe winter conditions and were just sort of killed continuously throughout the winter by wolves. So at any one particular time, there was less food for scavengers, but the food was more spread out over time, which was probably better for them overall. Kind of like, the way we extend our season by irrigating in the summer or something like that, right?
Okay, cool. Maybe we got to do a whole another episode on wolves
we can do
someday.
That another time.
But anyway, you saw this cougar.
Yeah.
And was that the moment you were like, oh my God, I gotta do this? Or how did you make your way to studying pumas?
Pumas, right. Yeah, I was a PhD student at Berkeley. So, I was always intrigued by the mountain lions in our backyard here. I've always been sort of fascinated by top predators. And so when I came to Santa Cruz, I started thinking, it'd be cool to have a local project and it'd be cool to study mountain lions. At that time, this is like 20 years ago, most of the studies on large carnivores had been done in these sort of large protected areas like Yellowstone. And here we had mountain lions, living in this sort of matrix of human development. I thought it'd be interesting to sort of look at how they're able to coexist with us.
So if we go back 20 years, what were some of the questions that you had at the time, and how have you gone about studying those questions?
Yeah, so the questions have sort of always been and remain like, how does human development, human activity on the landscape affect everything from these animals' physiology, behavior, populations, ecology, and ultimately their management and conservation.
So we don't, I mean, I have seen a puma once. It was actually in Patagonia. To be clear, not the store on River Street, but the actual the park, or the region. So I haven't seen one here, but we don't, around Santa Cruz, we rarely see, as kind of the community, it's rare to see one, right, with your own eyes.
Yeah, except for those populations in Patagonia, like mountain lions are virtually impossible to see anywhere else. And I think that's because they have a history of having co-evolved with either wolves or jaguars who can easily kill them, and so they're just quite cryptic by nature. There in Patagonia, they have a long evolutionary history of being the only top carnivore, and so you do see them out in the open, sort of hunting guanacos or whatever on the plains there.
So, kind of going back to this original set of questions, although you said that this continues to be the set of questions that you're exploring. Why is it then that pumas might be avoiding us? What is it about how they've evolved or how they've come to be that means that they're avoiding humans or other animals in the area?
Yeah, they avoid us, I think, for a pretty simple reason. That is, we're high risk to them, right? So if you look at in the Santa Cruz Mountains, the number one cause of mortality is getting killed by people. And if you look around the world, people are probably the number one or two cause for where they die. And so I think, that has exerted a strong selection over them over evolutionary time to be fearful and cryptic around us.
If I'm not mistaken, you found that there's kind of a range in how much distance they keep from us depending on what they're doing at any given time. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What does that look like, and what do you think that means?
Yeah, so if they're just moving around the landscape and hunting, they do two things around us. One is they become more nocturnal. So they're generally a nocturnal species, but they can, in places where there's very little human influence, they might spend 25% of a 24-hour period moving around in daylight. But if you look at them near us, then it's almost 0% that they're moving around in daylight. So one, they become more nocturnal, and two, they spatially avoid us. So if it's daytime, they're going to be far away from us, sleeping under a tree or doing what they do. Then at night, especially in the wee hours of the morning when, people are asleep and whatever, they'll walk through our neighborhoods and hunt. But if they're raising young kittens, then they're going to find a place to stash them in what we call their nursery sites that's, kind of as far away from people as they can be. There's the immediate danger from people, but there's danger from all kinds of, from dogs, from smaller carnivores like coyotes. Their kittens are quite small and super vulnerable. And so they're just trying to find a really remote place where they're not going to be bothered by us. They're not going to be bothered by the rest of the carnivore community.
Now, that doesn't surprise me a ton, right? It's like if you got a single adult and they're hunting, it kind of checks out that they would be more willing to take a risk to hunt and that they might want more safety for their kittens.
Yep.
Did that surprise you, or was that a novel finding when you were able to measure that?
It didn't surprise me that much, but it was novel in the sense that it's part of this sort of broader type of analysis ecologists do, which is called habitat selection. People who look at whether it's a wolf or an elk or a skunk or whatever, they say, well, where are the places that we find these animals? What habitats are they selecting for? And usually you just sort of take all your data of an animal, which is usually from a tag or a GPS tag of some kind, and you ask, where are the associations most strong? What was sort of novel about this approach was cutting it up by different behaviors, because animals do all different kinds of things. And if you're just assuming all behaviors are equal, you're going to get a different answer about habitat selection than you would if you cut it up by those different behaviors. And from a conservation standpoint or management standpoint, that matters because they need those remote places for raising their young. Otherwise, their populations aren't going to be able to succeed.
Unpack that for me a little bit. Like when you're slicing and dicing these ranges and these behaviors and stuff, what are the sort of the factors you're looking at? What are the behaviors that you're looking at? Like, let's unpack this whole analysis that you're doing here.
Yeah. So we really, this is sort of one of the first things we looked at. We looked at 4 different behaviors. We looked at moving, just like where are they when they're walking around the landscape. We looked at killing, where are they killing prey? And then we looked at communicating. So mountain lions communicate with each other by making these scrapes in the ground with their hind legs. And it's mostly the males that do it. They'll sort of push the duff back with their legs. They'll urinate in it. And then this is a signal to like other males that, hey, this is my territory. But it's also a signal to females who might be an estrus. Hey, I'm guy you want to mate with, right?
So they communicate through scent, not so much through their vocalizations.
Yeah, when it comes to sort of that first approach, the first date, it's really through scent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you've given us 3. What was the 4th?
The 4th is where they set up their nursery sites.
Okay. And so you were looking at those 4 behaviors and studying where they happened, sort of spatially.
Yep. And we basically found that the communication and nursery sites had one sort of characteristic habitat selection, and the moving and killing had another. So moving and killing, they do all over the place. They like to give us a sort of 100-meter buffer, but where they're sort of less likely to go. But they'll sort of kill anywhere between 100 meters from our house all the way to the wilderness. Whereas when they're communicating with each other and when they're breeding, they need a much bigger buffer, more like 600 meters.
Speaking of hunting and killing their prey, you found that they'll actually kill more deer when they're closer to humans. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
What's up
exactly.
with that?
If you look at how an animal behaves on a kill when they're far away from people, they basically just linger around that kill for a day, 2 days, sometimes up to a week, just sort of periodically feeding and resting, feeding and resting, feeding and resting.
It's like when I have a cake out on the counter and I just revisit it for a spoonful every...
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And you don't even go to your bedroom. But when they kill near people, like let's say they make a kill, it's 100 meters from someone's house, they'll feed there, 2 a.m., 4 a.m. in the wee hours of the night. But as soon as daylight comes out, people are up and about. They're moving off. They're moving off a few hundred meters. They're hanging out. And then they'll come back the next day, maybe at 10 p.m. or 12 a.m. and feed a little bit more. What happens in the interim? Well, you've got potentially scavengers coming in, coyotes, birds, turkeys, not turkeys.
I was going to say turkeys.
Turkey vultures,
okay.
Right? You have all these scavengers coming in, removing the food. They're disrupting the carcass too. Mountain lions, when they make a kill, they cover it with duff, and that protects it from getting, a lot of insects on it and getting maggot blown. So with all the scavenging and the insects and everything, those kills just don't last as long as they would if they were sort of tending them.
So this is kind of use the cake analogy, right? Like this is like, oh, I know my son's coming home pretty soon. I better pound this cake, or I better go get a different cake.
Or put it on a high shelf where he can't get it, right?
Right. Yeah. And actually, you're talking about scavenging behaviors when you did the study on wolves.
Yeah.
Is anybody looking at how this is changing scavenging behaviors for scavengers in our region?
Yeah, we've been looking at that too.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay, what are we seeing?
It's a little early to tell because we're still collecting data. But basically, the story I was telling you that there's more scavenging close to people than there is far away from people.
Okay, got it.
Because the mountain lions aren't protecting their kills.
So when these lions are killing more deer, right, when they're closer to human, or making more kills, I should say.
Mm-hmm. And it's up to like 50% more kills.
Whoa, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
What does this mean for their physiology or just their health? Is there any implication there?
Well, that's a good question. It could not be great because obviously they're having to expend a lot more energy, take on more risk. We do find that these areas closer to people are more likely to lead to their demise. Usually that has to do with us shooting them, but there does appear to be some sort of accumulated chronic risk and energetic impact that percolates up and causes them to get killed more quickly. or to die more quickly.
So if I'm thinking about these 4 factors again, we got moving, we've got hunting, we've got communicating, and we've got raising young, right? These are kind of those 4 behaviors you're looking at. We've talked a little bit about hunting. Let's talk about moving. So what have you seen? I mean, first of all, you've been studying these animals for a long time now, right? When did you start studying and tracking them?
It was 2008.
2008. Okay, so we're coming up on 20 years of data here. That's incredible.
Yeah, getting old.
Speaking of getting old, how long do they live? And are there any animals you've been able to study this whole time?
Yeah, I was just looking at that. We had this one animal, 25F, that we tracked for, I want to say like 10 or 11 years. We had another animal who we collared when he was young, and then we lost track of him. You know, sometimes we'll drop a collar prematurely to get the data back, and sometimes we're not able to recapture animals to replace the collar, so the collar drops off and we get the collar back. And so this was an animal that we recollared when he was a very old man, and we could tell he was an old man because his teeth were basically all missing. Wow. And he was fascinating because he behaved totally differently than like most big dominant males do.
How?
Well, he was kind of a naughty boy. First, he was moving all over the place. He didn't seem to be holding a territory, probably because he just wasn't strong enough against the other.
He wasn't the alpha, so to speak.
He wasn't the alpha male anymore. I think because his teeth were basically gone, I don't think he was capable of killing deer. And so he basically went sort of up and down the North Coast here, killing people's goats.
I had a neighbor lose some goats, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know if that was in the time range this was happening.
Where were you living?
Well, it was up by the mystery spot.
He wasn't down there. He was north of town.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the question was kind of about movement, how long you've been tracking some of these guys. That's where we started. And so for some of them, you track them a very long time. What have been some of the unexpected or exciting findings that you've discovered through so many years of tracking these animals?
Yeah, I mean, that is fascinating. There's a lot of things. One is how urban tolerant some animals are. So we've had multiple animals now set up home ranges east of 280, in between 280 and 101.
Oh my gosh, that's like right by the edge of Silicon Valley right there.
I mean, it is Silicon Valley, right? So the houses are like 10 feet from each other, right?
Yeah,
like they're on like quarter acre lots. And we have mountain lions who set up in there, and they're killing deer and raccoons and possums. And,
little dogs?
We haven't found that.
No? Okay.
We found very little predation on dogs in the study area. They do kill people's cats. But mostly they're feeding on natural prey, even in these sort of heavily urbanized areas. And they're making use of little ravines between houses and little tiny sort of like county parks and that kind of thing. And
why was this surprising or exciting to you? Just the proximity to human development?
I just sort of thought that they were more of a wilderness animal than that, right? Like, I don't think that's good habitat for them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they end up getting killed by mange or, odd causes like that, right?
What is mange?
Yeah, so mange is this little tiny mite that lives on the skin and fur of these animals. And when their populations get, really dense, they can cause a lot of the fur to fall off, and then these animals eventually die from freezing to death, essentially.
Oh, really? It's the temperature impact that is what gets them. Is that disease associated with more urban dwelling?
Well, it's associated with rodenticides, so rat poisons, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so, rat poisons, people put them out for rats and rodents and that kind of thing. The rodents eat them, but they don't die immediately. And then, mountain lion or coyote or bobcat eats them. And then the rodenticide levels build up in these larger carnivores. And the rodenticides don't seem to kill them themselves, but they make them more susceptible to diseases or to infection by mange. where you have animals close to agricultural fields or golf courses or towns, you see a lot more mange.
So in this conversation about animal movement and some of the things that you've found, there's a term I've been hearing thrown around more in a couple of different sort of wildlife circles of habitat fragmentation.
Yeah.
What is habitat fragmentation, and how does it play into the lives of mountain lions here in the Santa Cruz Mountains?
Yeah, so classically, habitat fragmentation is imagine like a tropical rainforest, right? And you come in and you cut down the forest, but you leave like little patches of forest, and they're separated from each other by what is now pasture or something like that. And so you have fragments of forest, right? So that's sort of like the classical definition of habitat fragmentation. But it just refers to any time that habitat is encroached upon by human development. And that could be in the classic sense, or it could be that there's roads cutting through with neighborhoods. It could be that there's farms interspersed. And so basically, instead of having a nice, clean slate of wilderness from one end to the other, you have pockets of human development. And that's habitat fragmentation.
If you haven't visited the Seymour Marine Discovery Center at UC Santa Cruz in a while, or ever, you really should come visit us. We are right on the bluffs of the beautiful Monterey Bay, with an aquarium full of local species and a bunch of hands-on science exhibits that help you understand what's happening in our ocean and along our coast. We are connecting the incredible research happening at UC Santa Cruz with real-world solutions for our coastal community. We don't want science to just sit on a shelf. We want it to shape decisions, inspire kids, and help our community feel equipped to act. So if you care about the future of our ocean and our coastal community, or you just want to experience a place that makes you feel a little more connected to it, come visit us at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. Science, Solutions, Santa Cruz. If I'm not mistaken, mountain lions need a lot of space to move, right? Or like that's how they've evolved, is using a ton of space.
Yeah. So a male mountain lion in the Santa Cruz Mountains might have a home range of 100 square kilometers or 150 square kilometers.
Massive.
Yeah.
So that's like if we were just kind of like as the crow flies, that would be from like Santa Cruz all the way down to the Big Sur, the Ventana Wilderness kind of down there.
Not quite that big, but the big male who might come, close to town here, might come from the west side of Santa Cruz, go all the way up to just south of Big Basin, go to Highway 1 and Empire Grade.
Okay, got it.
So that like rectangle might be their home range.
And I imagine there are a bunch of overlapping ranges.
Yeah, and then they all overlap.
So considering this geography and where we live, there's Highway 17, there's countless examples of us fragmenting their habitat.
Exactly.
And so how is that impacting mountain lions and their movement or other impacts?
Yeah, so movement-wise, it depends on the road. So a road like Highway 17 is going to often become a boundary to a territory. And instead of having animals overlapping at that boundary, you have animals that are east and west of Highway 17.
I kind of picture like a male and a female on either side of the highway being like, I miss you.
Yeah, well, that happened.
What? Really?
Yeah, because we had, it works out better for them if they do respect Highway 17 as a boundary. But we've had animals that, it's for a couple of years, it's a boundary, and then they start crossing over. And why do they start crossing over? Well, there's a female on the other side. And so we had 16M and 18F. So 16M is a male, 18F is a female. 16M was on the west side of Highway 17. His home range was like the Loch Lomond drainage, and that whole area. And then he starts crossing over at the Laurel Curve, where there's now a wildlife tunnel, but there wasn't back then. And he hooks up with 18F, and they start moving together and showing signs of mating with each other. And then on his way back, he gets hit on Highway 17. Fortunately, it didn't kill him, but he stops moving for like 2 weeks. He's just like in the same spot.
Like completely sedentary.
Yeah. And then he starts moving again, and we get him on a camera trap, and he's got a chunk of skin, maybe like a square foot of skin that's been like removed from his rump. And we catch him again maybe 6 months later, and that has healed up, but there's still like maybe a 2-inch by 2-inch open wound where he got injured. But amazingly, he recovered. And then 18F wasn't so lucky. A couple months later, she crossed, she got hit, and she had a fetus inside of her.
Oh no, and she didn't make it?
She didn't make it.
Oh no, terrible. And this was before the wildlife crossing under Highway 17.
Yeah.
Was that event related to that crossing being built?
Yeah, for sure. It contributed. So, our data on those two animals, in addition to a few other animals, was sort of instrumental in sort of pointing the spotlight on that area of road as an important place to have restore connectivity.
Let's go right there, okay? Because I'm fascinated to know how the science that you're doing is making its way to the solutions that are starting to pop up. Because I know there's another one underway. The Land Trust of Santa Cruz County and you and others are working on one down on Highway 101.
Right.
Help us understand how this, like literally your role, how are you getting your science to move to solution making?
I guess early on in the project, we started getting, a few animals starting crossing roads and getting hit on the roads. And there were a couple spots. There was the Laurel Curve on this side of the summit, and then there is a spot just north of the spillway of the Lexington Reservoir near Los Gatos. And those spots looked like the two places mountain lions were sort of crossing most. And so in the case of the Laurel Curve, I was chatting with the folks at the Land Trust and was showing them this data, and they start whispering to themselves. And apparently there was this parcel there called the Marywood parcel. It was, I think, owned by a convent. And they had been thinking about, getting a conservation easement for it or something like that. But they were kind of not very interested in it at the time because it was so close to 17. Like, what's the habitat value of a parcel, undeveloped parcel right next to 17?
They being the Land Trust?
The Land Trust, yeah. It's not the kind of place you'd imagine taking people for a hike or, doing something like that, right? So they were kind of like, had been approached, but were probably going to say no. And then all of a sudden you could see the thought processes spinning, right? And they were like, maybe this is a lot more valuable than we had thought it was from a
the
conservation
land itself
perspective. Yeah.
And so the Land Trust was the first group that you approached, and were you coming in hot like, we got to solve this, I know how to do it? Or what was your thought process?
No, I was more like, this is a problem. You guys do this kind of thing.
What can we do here?
Yeah. And I would say that I sort of, shined light on the issue, but then they really took it and ran with it and did all the hard work of acquiring land on both sides of the highway, engaging with Caltrans, and, ultimately getting the thing built.
And is that, what I'm hearing you say is like, you're doing the research, you're finding these insights, and your role in this is to shine the light?
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah. And then you partner up with people who are kind of more boots on the ground or, policymakers to get the solution pushed through. Is that fair?
Yeah. I'd say that the shining the light's fair. The partnering up, it's like I do what I can, but I'm not as necessary at that point in time, right?
Wow. Wow.
I can give inspiring talks to the public and get people jazzed about mountain lions.
Yeah,
right?
I know. You'll pack the Rio like regularly on lectures about mountain lions.
Yeah, once or twice.
And so how involved were you along? You gave, tongue in cheek, you gave talks, but I know that was an important role. Like you? Did you have a seat at the table all the way from ideation all the way to the moment that the ribbon was cut for that crossing?
Yeah, in a way we were in touch, right?
Yeah.
So, but there was a lot of meetings, a lot of heavy lifting that I just wasn't in the room for.
Sure. So what are we finding as a result of the wildlife crossing, which opened, I want to say, in 2022 or 2023?
Yeah, I think it's been a couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years.
It seems to be working great. There have been 0 or close to 0 animals getting hit on the road, that stretch of road, whereas before there were animals getting hit all the time. And by animals, I don't just mean mountain lions. I mean like deer and foxes and other critters.
Oh, so we're down from, I don't know how many like hits there were, collisions there were, but we're down to almost zero.
I think so. I think that's right. Yeah.
That's incredible.
And it's used regularly by deer, foxes, bobcats, and then occasional mountain lions.
Yeah, if you follow the Land Trust on Instagram or whatever, they will often post images from the trail cam or the wildlife cam of bobcats and mountain lions moving through it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it had been so successful though.
Yeah.
And is that in and of itself surprising to you, or is that what you would expect?
I mean, it's kind of what I would expect. Yeah. The other important part about it is the directional fencing. So it kind of makes it a lot harder for animals to get across the road there. And so then they, walk along the fence line, they find the tunnel and they go across that way.
Directional fencing, meaning, was this a deliberate installation?
Yeah. Yeah. That's how you're driving past the tunnel, is that there's fencing on both sides of the road there.
Okay. And so that was part of the design. It was like, hey, we got a fence around the crossing so that the animals are forced to find Okay, got it. That's incredible. Congratulations. And to the whole Land Trust team.
Yeah.
What other solutions are you involved in or aware of as it relates to protecting these incredible animals?
Yeah, so there's been, quite a lot of land acquisition too over the last 20 years, led by the Land Trust and other groups like Peninsula Open Space Trust and Trust for Public Lands. And so I'm engaging with them all the time about what's the value of this land versus that land, and would this be a good place for mountain lion habitat, and if we did buy it and wanted to put in recreation, what would be a good way to design the recreation so it would minimize the impacts on mountain lions, those kinds of things.
I'm curious, when it comes to recreation, what are some of the design choices one could make?
I think the idea is to have large areas of intact habitat without a trail going through it. So instead of crisscrossing every inch and maximizing every place you can put a trail, put the trails along, one side of the property and leave the other side of the property just trailless. That's
interesting, because I had Eric Lombardo from the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County in here for a conversation recently, and we were talking about public access, right? And public access being this really powerful tool for conservation. And I think what I'm hearing you say is there's a limit to how far that can go in terms of public access.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know. We definitely know that mountain lions and many other species avoid people, but they will also use trails, right? So one thing we've been looking at recently is we've been using Strava data and pairing that with mountain lion data to try to understand, how is hiking and biking and that kind of thing affecting the way these animals move across the landscape. It's sort of like housing. We see that they avoid those places with trails, especially strongly during the day. But then at night they'll come back to those areas and use them. So, the way to think about it, we're not quite sure what the sort of ultimate implications are on their survival and reproduction and those kinds of things, which are questions that take a lot more time and a lot more data to answer. But trails take away a little bit of part of the day, right? And maybe mountain lions can just make up for that by better utilizing the night. So that's one thing that's definitely crucial, is I definitely think these properties should be closed at night to people. Especially I wouldn't want to see people mountain biking with lights all through the night in these places.
Does that happen right now?
I think there's a little bit of nighttime riding. I don't think it's huge, but I wouldn't want to see it get a lot bigger, for instance.
Sure. I could see that all of a sudden becoming the new adventure, extreme elements of mountain biking is to do it at night.
Yeah, and the equipment gets better and better and better, right? The lights get better, the bikes get better. You got electricity powering you. Everything's getting better all the time, right? So and also things are getting busier all the time. So you could see the night becoming more of a sort of part of human recreation in these landscapes. And I think that would almost surely be bad for the wildlife.
On one hand, I feel heartened that more people, in fact, I don't know, I suspect there's data that goes back to the pandemic and being like, once the pandemic hit, more of us started going outside, more of us started using these incredible resources locally. And on one hand, I'm like, great, to the point that Eric from the Land Trust made was like, more people outside, more people care, more attention and support for conservation. On the other hand, more people outside, more people using the trails, coming up with new ways to use the trails, which disrupts wildlife.
Yep.
There's this inherent tension that seems to be emerging right now. And how do we as a community, or how do we as decision makers balance those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be clear, we don't exactly know what the power of that tension is, if you will, like how much recreation impacts these animals and other species.
That's what you're studying.
That's what we're studying. So I think, as society develops and does new things, we need science to look at these things and understand the impact. And then most importantly, we need policymakers who will take into account the findings of scientists.
Do you think that's happening in our community?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, you do?
Yeah, I think our community is pretty good at that.
Yeah, and that's a theme that keeps emerging here is that we do have a community of, just people who live here, but also decision makers who take this stuff seriously and are listening to folks like you as they make their decisions. I brought up the pandemic, which makes me remember a question I wanted to ask you, which was, I'm remembering back and seeing images online of all of these animals entering urban spaces when we were all, shut in our homes. Did we see anything like that happen in Santa Cruz with the mountain lions during the pandemic?
Yeah. So they became a little more urban. So we looked at, I was telling you about this habitat selection analysis we were doing. What we typically have are two covariates in the analysis. One for housing density, so how do they respond to houses on the landscape, and the other is the urban edge, right? So the urban edge is a little different than housing density because, of course, there's houses in the urban area, but urban areas have sidewalks, they have bus systems, they're just busier than you would explain just from the houses alone. And so what we see is that they don't change their attitude towards houses at all, which makes sense because people are just as much at home during the pandemic, maybe even more so. But they relax their avoidance of the urban edge.
Meaning they came onto the streets, or they came on towards the bus stops and towards the industrial areas on the edge of town.
Yeah.
And did that mean anything to you?
I mean, to me, it pointed out a couple things. One is that human mobility kind of impacts these species, right? So the more mobile we are, the more out there in the environment we are, walking around on bikes, in cars, on buses, the more that sort of impacts them. And the other thing is that they're probably responding to us and learning about us through sound, which is maybe not so surprising, but there could be other ways they would do that. But, I think everybody appreciated during the pandemic that when you went into town, it just was quiet.
Sure. I had Matt Miller from Ecology Action on. We were talking about some of Ecology Action's efforts to transform transportation and mobility in Santa Cruz. Is there any version of transportation in our community that might mean better outcomes for the mountain lions?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not sure that urban mobility probably is going to impact them all that greatly, because even though they relax their avoidance, it's not like the urban area is a great habitat for them. I guess what I worry about more is more mobility in open spaces.
Okay, so that it really is on foot or on bike.
Yeah. And we are if you were here 30 years ago, there'd be hardly anybody biking in a place like Wilder. Now, not only are people biking, but they're electric biking, right? In another 20 years, maybe we're electric roller skating, I don't know. And that's great because it gives people access, but it also like increases the amount of human use.
Yeah, this is that tension rising again.
Yeah.
So speaking of solutions, I'm also aware that mountain lions were recently granted a new level of protection.
Yeah.
Was it at the federal level?
No, it's at the state level.
At the state level.
Yeah.
And so what is that protection? What does it mean for mountain lions?
Yeah, so mountain lions are now a state threatened species from the Bay Area south along the coast to the Mexican border. It doesn't apply to like Marin County and north or to the Sierra Nevadas. And so they've got extra protection. It's affected depredation policy.
Depredation.
So depredation is where a mountain lion kills someone's goats, for instance. Landowner gets a permit from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CDFW, to then shoot the mountain lion. That's a depredation.
Okay, got it.
And so with the listing, the depredation policy has gone from like, you can shoot any animal that has killed your goats to a kind of 3-strike policy where the animal has to do it 3 times before you can shoot them. And you have to show some attempts to better protect your livestock.
What does that look like?
Well, mountain lions, a lot of people who have livestock might have a fence to keep the livestock in, but they don't keep the mountain lions out because the mountain lions can just jump over the fence.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a 4-foot fence.
Yeah.
That's no problem for mountain lion.
No problem. So the fix is to, put a roof on it, right? So have some kind of enclosure that's going to prevent mountain lions from getting in at night. And that takes care of 95% of the issues. Now,
if I'm a farmer or a livestock keeper, I could see how that might be concerning for me, right? As some, maybe I'm making my living off of this.
Yeah.
That now there's a huge capital investment that I got to make in order to protect, and protect my investment, so to speak. How does this play out from the livestock keeper's point of view? What role do they have in this change? And how does this play out?
Yeah, so most of the livestock is just in sort of rural residential homes. So it's people who have jobs in town, they're commuting to town, they've got 3 goats, and they're out sort of, feeding during the day. They come back, they put them in the corral at night, and then the mountain lion comes at night. And sometimes, maybe they get home. Maybe they do have a proper enclosure, but they come home after dark, and by then the mountain lions. So it's mostly a function of this fragmentation we were talking about, right? Like, people who live in the countryside often have more animals than people who live in cities, and so the more that you get these sort of low density developments scattered throughout our forests, the more likely you're going to have conflict with mountain lions.
So I was imagining, when I asked that question, I was imagining like major livestock operations, but that's not really the case here. That we're talking about some smaller.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are larger livestock operations, less so in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but in terms of the number of animals who get in trouble and get depredated, it's mostly the sort of small homeowner that is having the conflict.
Okay, and so now it's saying like, hey, before we approve you going out and shooting this animal, you got to show that this animal is taken, it's the 3 strikes.
Yeah.
They've come 3 times.
Yeah.
And you got to show that you've taken some measures to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
Before we can approve it. Is there any other sort of like implications of this new protection?
Yeah, I think so. So I think this new protection, even though it kind of like got codified just a couple months ago, it's been in effect for like 5 years or something like that. Yeah, because they were petitioned for listing like 5 or 6 years ago, and then what happens is that the Fish and Game Commission, which is an elected or appointed body by the governor, they vote on whether to study it or not, right? And so they approved it, which meant that they were provisionally listed, and then the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they have to sort of do a big gathering of evidence and put together a sort of plan and proposal for what the listing would look like and recommend whether to list or not. The listing really went into effect 5 years ago. It got sort of made permanent, a couple months ago. And so I'd say when it started happening, there seemed to become a lot more interest in connectivity, right? And trying to reconnect these coastal mountain ranges, which have been bifurcated by roads and development. And so, there's a lot more efforts now to build bridges or tunnels across highways, efforts to protect critical lands that connect those linkages. And the state has been putting more money into this through the Wildlife Conservation Board, which gives grants to groups like the Land Trust to protect these things. And so I think that engagement is always kind of going on, but I think it's increased because of the listing of mountain lions.
It seems like between the crossings and these protections, seems like there's some momentum here, in the community throughout the state.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
So what's next?
Yeah, so I think the next thing to do is to reconnect all these mountain ranges. So there's a lot of bridges and tunnels that need to be built across roads. There's a lot of critical lands that need to be protected from, getting developed. Those are the two big things, really.
And I imagine the implication of that is kind of all of these overlapping ranges. We got to make sure that all of those overlaps, all of those little links exist. Because if we don't, what happens if we don't?
Well, so the reason they got listed is if you look at their genetics, the animals in these different mountain ranges are no longer breeding with each other. And so the populations, these mountain ranges aren't very big. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, we have maybe 50, 60 adult mountain lions. And so if you look at their genetics, they're becoming more and more inbred. And you see that in the levels of heterozygosity or variation in the genomes. And you're starting to see it in sort of their phenology too. So we're starting to see mountain lions whose testicles fail to descend. This is more in the Santa Monica Mountains than here because we haven't really been looking for that so much. If you take sperm samples from these animals, you see that over 90% of the sperm are deformed.
Wow! Already you're seeing that today.
Yeah. So that's from the Santa Monica Mountains.
Okay.
We haven't looked for that here.
Okay.
But what we do see here are kinked tails. That was something they started to see in Florida with the Florida panther, which is a mountain lion, right? And they became highly inbred because they were the small refugial population in the Everglades, not connected to any other mountain lion populations. And so they started becoming highly inbred and started seeing the exact same things that we're seeing in coastal California. These testicles that fail to descend, the low sperm counts, and kinked tails.
And this is the power of long-term scientific studies, of collaborating with other scientists in other areas. And the implication of building these wildlife crossings is not just simply that they're not getting hit by cars on the road, but that by connecting all these ranges, we are strengthening, or I guess allowing them to strengthen once again their genetic diversity.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Congratulations and thank you for everything that you're
thank
doing.
you.
Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I think that's okay.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, that does it for the pod. Hey, before we go, would you do me a favor and subscribe or follow the show? Give it a rating, give it a like. These things really do matter and really do help get more eyeballs on the show. So if you like it and you want others to see it too, please do one of those things. It really does help. Thanks to Edith Belmont for editing. Thanks to Cassidy Beach for production. And thanks to Valerie C2 for distribution. We'll see you next time.